Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome along to Leading Lights, CMI's series of interviews with great leaders from across the CMI community. I'm Matt Roberts, I'm the Director of Membership at CMI, and today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined as my guest by Lord Mark Price, President of CMI, founder of WorkL. Mark is also a former government minister in the Department for International Trade, former Managing Director of Waitrose and Deputy Chair of the John Lewis Partnership. Mark's also a published author, having written 5 books on business, food, and indeed a book for children. Mark, thanks very much for joining us today, and we're delighted to have you with us.
It's my pleasure, Matt. It's really good to see you.
Good stuff. So, look, we're going to explore a number of different topics today, Mark. As you know, you're leading our 75th project, our 75th anniversary project this year, where we're exploring all sorts of aspects of management and leadership and what the skills and key attributes will be for the future. We'll be looking in detail at that today. And I guess before we get into the discussion in real depth, I'd like to get some of your thoughts about the importance of values and ethics in leadership and how the best leaders really they help to set the culture in organizations by really living by values and demonstrating great ethics. Just great to have your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, of course. I think the first thing to say is that nobody sets out to be a bad and unethical manager. I think everybody wants to do a great job. But there are a number of things that I think influence managers. The first is their reason for being, core purpose in the organization they're leading. For some, it's maximizing shareholder value and they're focused on that. For others, it's about looking after their customers. For others, it's about looking after their people. And so, in a sense, the objectives that you're given by your board or your shareholders dictate how you're going to manage. Now, obviously, you can adapt, but I think that has a lot of resonance, really, in terms of how people go about managing. And then the second is your experience. So what experience do you have of good management and bad management? And how can you learn lessons to get more from people? Because ultimately, for me, there's both a moral and a commercial argument in favor of whether you describe it as purpose-driven management or ethical management. And that's this, that what we know from research is organizations who have got happy and engaged people working for them, those organizations have higher earnings per share, 124% higher, they have lower staff turnover, they have lower sick absence, they have greater productivity. So there is a very clear commercial case to look after your people and to develop them and to give them a sense of purpose in what they're doing. But also there's a moral case because, as I say, I don't think any manager wants to go into work to make the life of the people they're managing deliberately difficult. So I've always felt from my time in the John Lewis Partnership, whose supreme purpose is the happiness of the people that work there, and I worked there for 34 years, and from what I learned growing up, that it's much better to support people to be the best they can be, and to coach and develop people, both from a moral standpoint, a societal standpoint, and also a commercial standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And really interesting that your time with the John Lewis Partnership and that supreme mission there that the organization had, practically, how did that sort of manifest itself on a day-to-day basis as a leader within the partnership?
Well, that's a really good question, because when I joined on day one, I was told the supreme purpose was the happiness of the people that worked in the organization. So I scratched my head and said, well, in a practical sense, what does being happy at work mean? I was very fortunate that over my years there, I got to work with some fantastic managers and leaders. I was also very lucky that I went to study at INSEAD and London Business School and Wharton. And so I spent a lot of time looking at what drives and engages people. And what I discovered, and I set out in one of the books that I wrote, and in the WorkL business that I've now founded, is that there are 6 key things that drive high levels of happiness and engagement at work. Their reward and recognition. So people have to feel that they're being paid fairly for the job that they're doing. And interestingly, it's about getting pay that's fair if you overpay people, they don't skip into work and work any harder. But if you underpay them, it grates all the time. So getting pay that's at a level that people think is fair. Far more important is recognition, just telling people they've done a good job. And in the UK, we're really poor at that. All of our research shows that in terms of what motivates people, pay comes about ninth. Motivation in terms of being thankful for what they do is in the top three continually. And yet on average in the UK, we only thank people for a job well done on average once every 4 months. But we criticise or we give developmental feedback twice a week. So I don't think you can underestimate the importance of telling people they're doing a good job and encouraging people. The second thing that drives high levels of engagement is whether people know what's going on, just being well informed about their job and being trained to do their job, but also being well informed about the organisation that they work in, so they feel a part of it. And the founder of the John Lewis Partnership, a guy called Speed and Lewis, felt that that knowledge was the single most important thing if you're going to have an engaged workforce. The third thing is empowerment. So trusting people to do a job, acting as a manager that's supporting and coaching your team, not expecting your team to work on your behalf. The more that you can empower, the more ultimately you'll get from people, because they'll have a greater sense of responsibility. The fourth thing is about well-being, demonstrating the organisation genuinely cares for somebody's mental, physical and financial well-being. Having a sense of purpose, so feeling that you're doing a job that's going to make a difference to other people, a difference to society. That creates high levels of engagement. And lastly, feeling satisfied in your job. And really, there are two things there that are critically important, Matt. The first is feeling as though you're being developed. And we're doing a lot of work at WorkL at the moment on flight risk, people leaving their jobs. And what we've seen is the percentage of people who are completing our survey who are going to leave their jobs has increased by 6 percentage points over the last year, which is huge. Yeah. And we particularly find that that's with a 40 to 55-year-old age group. And one of the constant refrains from that group is, we've not been to training for years, we've not been developed for years, the world's moved on. So there's a really big piece about training and development in terms of people feeling that they've got a place in an organisation for the long term. And the last and singularly the most critical, the number one reason people either stay or leave an organisation is the relationship they have with their line manager. And if there is one silver bullet, if anybody wants to measure how engaged their workforce is and how happy their workforce is, just ask one question. On a scale of 0 to 10, how do you get on with your line manager? And if the answer is 10, I can guarantee that on a broad range of questions about engagement, they'll score in the 80s. If they're 0, they'll score in the 20s. It's the most leading question that you can ask about how people are feeling in their workplace. So the role of the manager and the role of good management is critical in ensuring that you have lower levels of sick absence, higher levels of productivity, etc., etc.
Yeah. Superb insights, thank you. I mean, I think great within what you've said that there's so much that our viewers can take actually from that. So, I mean, the quick win there is that massive delta between the regularity with which we criticise or give constructive sort of feedback around something that hasn't gone so well, once or twice a week, versus on average every 4 months we might praise somebody for work that's well done. I think managers and leaders starting to address that delta seems to be something that we can look at as quick wins in leadership positions. As you say, we're not great at that in the UK.
Well, I think that's right. And what we tend to focus on is the technical skills that you require for a job. And so when somebody starts in the job, we say, look, you've got to complete a health and safety this, or you've got to complete this mechanical training on that, or whatever it is. And in the professions, you've got to pass this qualification or that qualification. And so much energy gets into, I technically understand this job. And of course you need that. The next step is when you are actually leading people. And your focus clearly needs to still be on, what does good look like in this job? What do people have to deliver? But it's far more about, how do I get the team I'm working with to deliver more? What is it that's going to motivate them? And I think that for me, one of the most telling things that I learned from my time in the John Lewis Partnership was that I was working for them, they weren't working for me. And I did work with some leaders who did have that mindset. They felt that they had been promoted to a position because of, the qualifications they had, or, whatever, their life opportunities, whatever. And they felt that my job was to protect them, make sure they didn't do anything silly, make them look good. And it's never a great feeling. And I think that there's a bit of that going on in Downing Street at the moment. It's, why didn't you tell me this was wrong? Why didn't you protect me from doing this? Whereas the individual should be saying, why didn't I know that this was a really bad idea? And I think that you get that in the workplace. So you get managers that are either leading from the front and are saying, I have a moral compass, I know right from wrong, I'm here to get the best out of my people. Or there are some leaders, some managers, who say, now I'm in the position, it's my team's job to make me look good. And I just think that's a very old-fashioned way of thinking. And I don't think younger people coming through business now want to tolerate that. They want to be developed themselves.
Absolutely. And so just thinking about some of the challenges that you faced sort of earlier in your career, and perhaps some of the experiences you had where you were working for people that perhaps were expecting the wrong things, and as you say, it doesn't make you feel great. Maybe you could sort of reflect on some of the challenges that you overcame in the early part of your career that perhaps you can see are still prevalent today, and might help to provide a bit of advice for those that are overcoming those challenges at the moment.
Well, I count myself as being incredibly lucky. I was born and brought up in Crewe. My dad had his own small business. I managed to qualify, get the results to go to the grammar school in Crewe. And from there, I went to university. And when I joined the John Lewis Partnership, the wonderful thing about it is it was a genuinely meritocratic business. And so it didn't matter that I had that path against other people that may have come from public school or had different advantages. So first, the sector retail, which is really driven by, I think, entrepreneurial ability, and is very results driven and trading driven. That means that if you're good at those things, you tend to get on. And secondly, the John Lewis Partnership was about equality for everybody. And so I felt very, very fortunate to build a career in a company that didn't look at where I came from, what my dad did for a living, what kind of house I used to live in, what kind of school I went to. So I count myself hugely fortunate. Now, I don't think everybody is in that position. I don't think they were when I came into the workplace in '82, and I don't think that's the same today. So for me, how do you reward meritocracy? How do you ensure that everybody has an equal opportunity? That's as important to me today as it was when I first came into the workforce 40 years ago. I think the second thing is that you do find a range of managers that you work for. I work for some extremely talented managers, and I work for some that I had a less good relationship with. And that was part of my development. How do I work with those people? And the more senior you become in business, the more you realise that you don't have direct control. When I was running Waitrose, I can't make a local council or a property developer sell to me in Waitrose over Sainsbury's or Tesco. And so what you have to develop are those influencing skills, EQ skills, which are more around without having power, the ability to tell people what to do. How do you succeed? And so I think that for me, that there were two really big lessons I learned in my business career. One was about rewarding ability, genuinely rewarding ability, no matter what shape, size, color that ability came in. And the second was teaching people that those powers of persuasion, those soft skills, core skills, however you want to describe them, become more vital the higher up you go in any business. People often think that when you're the boss, you just tell people what to do. That may be the case if you have a particular crisis and people are looking for that kind of leadership at that moment. But 9 times out of 10, that isn't what people want. People want to be involved and included in what's going on. They want to know the part that they can play. They want to know the importance of what they're doing in terms of shaping an organization's overall future. So the better that a leader can become in sharing that responsibility with as many people as possible, I think the more successful they'll be. So those were the two lessons for me. How do you try to make everybody in the organization feel that they are vital to the organization, have a role to play, and you're dependent on them? And how do you make sure that at every level in the organization, it's genuine talent that's being rewarded and being promoted rather than on any other basis?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We'll explore
the other thing. Sorry, Matt. The other thing I'd say, because it occurred to me when I made the last point, the John Lewis Partnership had a very active policy, which would that they would promote internally over externally if there were two equally measured candidates. But the presumption was always that you would go for an internal candidate, and if you had to go for an external candidate, what that demonstrated was a lack of ability for that manager or leader to develop people to the required standard. So you were expected to develop people who could succeed you, and you were expected to develop a standard within the organization. And what you got from that was an incredibly strong culture. Now, there is a danger in that. There is a danger. And the partnership always saw that, and it always did bring in fresh blood to stimulate new debate and new ideas. But the investment that it made in people to continually train and develop throughout their career, I always saw as being one of the most outstanding things of the organization. You know, everybody at every level throughout their career with the organization would have a significant budget to be trained and developed. So that's probably one of the other things I learned in my career.
Mm-hmm. That sort of nicely brings us on to my next question, actually, Mark. So we've obviously lived through incredibly turbulent times over the last couple of years now, arguably longer. Really interested just to explore some of the pros and cons, I guess, of the fact that change is happening all of the time and probably at a more rapid pace than ever right now, versus the sort of need for some level of continuity and stability within organizations. I just wonder what your thoughts are on how the best leaders are sort of facing change and embracing it without losing some of the benefits of continuity.
So I'll preface what I'm going to say by using the line, if you've got your feet in the fridge and your head in the oven, you're an average temperature, but you're not in good shape. And I think that if you look at the statistics of the last 2 years, and at WorkL, we've done lots of research into how people have been feeling working from home and working from the office, there is no doubt that people have been much happier working from home. Flight risk is 6 percentage points lower for people working from home. Well-being is 7 percentage points higher for people working from home. And in every area, from pay to feeling trusted to be given more responsibility, scores are higher when people have been working from home. And that's because managers have had to trust their team to get on with things. And there has been a dividend in that, in terms of how people feel about their work and their workplace. However, this comes to my feet in the fridge and head in the oven analogy. There are some groups that haven't been as happy. Younger people have particularly missed career development, the ability to mix with colleagues. If you work in the creative sector, you've missed the opportunity to bounce off colleagues. So it's not been the same for everybody. And I think that's the big thing for me that I've learned in terms of managing my own business and working with CMI and Fairtrade and others, that people have reacted to it in different ways. Some people do not want to go back to the office ever. Some people want to go back part-time. Some people want to go back full-time. Some people want greater flexibility. Some people have used this time to really review what they want to do with their lives. Do they want to have the same job? Do they want to work full-time? And so what we're going through at the moment, some people have described as the Great Resignation. And there's no doubt that more people, in all the research we have done, are reflecting on what they want their working life to be and what they want to do in a way that people haven't had time to reflect historically. And I think that does present real challenges for managers. We worked with an organisation, I won't say which one, and they did a piece of work with us to survey their workforce on how they were feeling about coming back to the office. Overwhelmingly, the research said they did not want a big bang, we're all back in the office 5 days a week. However, for whatever reason, the management decided that's what they were going to do. And instantly, they had 40% of their workforce hand their notice in. And they had a massive recruitment issue. And I think that things are quite febrile at the moment about how people are feeling. And I think you've got to try to gently pace your way through how you bring people back to a normal working world after 2 years of anything but normal, to find out how you can carry those people. There's also, I think, for all managers, a fundamental and philosophical question about which do they prefer in two regards. One, do they prefer to have a established team that they continue to develop, and they see their principal role as training and development? Or do they see their role as churning their people and lifting the bar by bringing new people in all the time? And, in the extreme examples, we all know the bottom 20% are culled every year, and that culture. I've always worked in a culture that's about, we want to keep the workforce we've got and train and develop them and make them more loyal and understand the culture. So I think there is a question about, what do you want to achieve in your workforce? Do you want continuity? Do you want, therefore, to be able to invest in training and development? Or do you want to cull people more regularly, and do you want to bring in, theoretically, a higher standard to drive the bar in that way? The second way the second thing is how you see change in an organisation. I always felt that 100%, 1% improvements were better than a 100% improvement. So if you think to yourself, how am I going to get lots of incremental improvements in the business I'm in? It's very hard to do that when you're just sitting at the top of that business. You've got to involve the whole workforce and say, look, we need to find lots of ways to improve in sales and cost control and whatever it should happen to be. That sets you out on a fundamentally different course to saying, we've got to fundamentally revolutionize the way this business works. Now, of course, there are times that has to be done. If you look at the media, the press, they're facing an existential threat that people don't buy physical papers, they're moving online. Will they have a business? There are some businesses where you have to say, look, we need radical change. How are we going to do it? But I think there are a lot where you just think about, let's constantly make improvements. I've always been struck by Next and Simon Wilson, who I admire greatly. And the fact that he says they never write a strategy paper and they never have a 10-year strategy. They just see every year where they are and how they're going to adapt. And so for me, he's more in that camp about evolutionary change, and we see how it goes, than planning some kind of massive structural change. So I think that when managers have really thought about how they want to drive strategic change and how they want to drive organizational people change, that will lead them on either one course or another. I was very clear about the approach I wanted to take, but obviously for different people at different times in different organizations, they'll decide which of those two approaches best suits them.
Indeed. Okay, so thinking a little bit more now about some of the detail that we're exploring as part of the 75th anniversary project that you're leading at CMI, Mark. I was struck by what you said about the culture and approach, really, of the John Lewis Partnership, dedicated to meritocracy, developing people to give them opportunities. And of course, with the 75th anniversary, we're looking at exploring aspects where we don't yet have equality of opportunity, whether that be around matters of gender, whether it be around ethnicity, age, disability, socioeconomic backgrounds, etc. We're looking at a broad range of factors that influence opportunity in our society and in professional roles. I'm interested to hear a little bit more from you about how you personally have gone about trying to ensure that, for example, as many women as men are able to fully achieve their ambitions within the organizations that you've led, how you've looked to improve ethnic diversity, give opportunities to people of different age groups, different stages of life, etc. Really just keen to hear a little bit more about that from you, please.
Yeah, of course. Well, I think the first point to make, Matt, as you'll know from the research that we've already conducted, and we've had 3 commission meetings already, is that there isn't equality at the moment. Women have made great strides in the workplace, but are still underrepresented. If you look at ethnic minority groups, they're underrepresented. The last piece of work last commission we had was on social mobility. And if all other things were equal, there'd be 450,000 more people from poorer socioeconomic backgrounds in management than there are. And we find there are huge regional variations. So there's no doubt that if all things were equal, the makeup of management in workplaces would be very different. I think that for me, the important thing is to start by recognizing that, and then asking yourself in the organization you're in, if all things were equal, why don't we have this kind of blend in our workforce? And then, of course, you get into debates about positive discrimination and whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing. On occasions, I think it's a good thing. On occasions, I think it's not a good thing. I think that more often enough, you have to make sure that the pipeline reflects the senior management that you would want to see. I think that you then have to accept that you need a more flexible approach if you are going to get that kind of equality towards the top of an organization. At the moment, I think we're wasting a huge amount of talent of people that are dropping out of the workplace or are not pursuing the careers they could pursue because we don't recognize some of the disadvantages that those people might have. So the first thing for me is awareness, and it's what are the numbers? Are you measuring it? I think that on gender now we're pretty good. I think that there is reporting. I think on ethnicity increasingly we're doing a better job at understanding what the mix should look like and wanting to see those changes. I think on social mobility, I think we're less good. I think there's still an awful lot of work to do in that space. And that's not to say that the first 2 I mentioned are done. I don't think they're done, but we're definitely getting better. Again, I feel very lucky that set out in the Constitution, the John Lewis Partnership, I worked for 34 years. It actively stated there should be no discrimination, and the John Lewis Partnership appointed women to the most senior positions in the organisation in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, way ahead of when you might see it in other organisations. And when you started to get those breakthroughs, it makes it easier for other people to come through and be role models. So what I very much hope, Matt, is that the report that we write, draws out in a quantitative sense the issue. Secondly, starts to think about how would you want to train and develop managers to recognise these issues and what would you want them to do? And thirdly, also points government in the direction to say, here are some of the issues, here are some of the things government you might like to think about in terms of trying to solve some of these problems.
Indeed, absolutely. I'm just sort of thinking a little bit as well what you mentioned about sort of taking positive action and so forth. And I just wonder, in terms of your views, and how important do you think sponsorship of people that perhaps don't have the advantages that others do is, having a sponsor within an organisation? Have you seen examples of that working out very positively? What are your views on sponsorship?
Yeah, definitely. No, I think it's hugely important having a mentor. One of the things we do at WorkL is we do a new starter survey. So when somebody starts in an organisation, every month they fill in a survey. It's shared with a mentor or the organisation. And organisations do it for 2 reasons. One, to try and stop people dropping out early on and to see if they're becoming disillusioned. But secondly, to make sure that somebody does build that kind of rapport and has somebody who can support them develop within the business. For a lot of people, it's just having the confidence to know that they can compete and they can develop. They may walk into an organization that's blue chip, where people talk differently to them, look different to them, have different religious beliefs to them, and all of a sudden they feel as though it's not an environment that they can grow and thrive in. And so having somebody who can support you to say, no, we can do these things, and having a management team that want to think about utilizing all of the capability that's available, irrespective of gender, race, color, creed, whatever, that to me, that strikes me as being something that commercially all businesses would want to do. But it does start with the data. It's, what is the breakdown of your workforce? How do those minorities or majorities feel about the workforce? It's only when you understand the quantitative that you can start putting policies in place to make sure that there is meritocratic opportunity for all. I mean, that's what every business should want to see. I can't see an argument why you wouldn't want that.
Absolutely. I guess one of the things where, again, perhaps we're seeing progress made, but there's certainly a long way still to go, is perhaps the fluency or the confidence that maybe middle managers have actually with opening up conversations with their teams, their people, around some of the issues that may be leading to a lack of equality of opportunity. So how do we go about helping middle managers to become more confident in talking about matters of race, of gender, of disability, and so forth?
Well, they have to be supported by their manager. I think one of the things I've seen, particularly over the last 20 years, is the stripping out of middle management. And again, in the research we do, what it clearly shows is that younger managers feel under enormous pressure. They're being given management responsibility in their early mid-20s without any real training to be able to carry out those roles, and without the support of their senior management. So if I was to generalize, which I hate doing, and look at the results of workplace engagement, happiness, experience for middle managers, the ones that are young would say that they're having a less good time at work than their non-management counterparts. And that's entirely because they're not being supported. They're being told to achieve X, Y, and Z, but without themselves being given the coaching. So it always flows from the top of an organization. If you're the CEO and you've got 8 or 10 direct reports, if you're looking after those people and nurturing them, and then they've each got 8 or 10 direct reports and they're nurturing and looking after their people, then it cascades down through the organization. Culture is the sediment of past transactions. And so if you have a culture in a business where managers are actively supporting the people underneath them to be the best they can be, then it becomes part and parcel of what's done every day. If you appoint a new manager with very little experience and say, look, your job on month 1 is to make 4 people redundant and to double your sales and halve your costs, now go away and do it. I mean, that's going to create a lot of pressure. I know that's extreme, and I can't believe anybody would do that. But I mean, as a possible scenario, that's where you get into trouble. So I wouldn't. My starting point wouldn't be to point the finger at middle management and say you can do a better job. My finger would be pointed at every leader who manages a team to say, have you given your team the coaching, the development, the training, the time, the support, the space that they need to be really good at their jobs? And the other thing is that every day we all make hundreds of decisions, and you have to make decisions in business, you're left or right. People that don't make decisions, I think, are the worst managers. They just prevaricate and you never get anywhere. But when you're making a decision, you need to learn and be very honest about when you've got things wrong. And one of the things I've done for a very long time is to reflect every evening, and I have a diary, on the things that I did in the day that I thought went well and things that I misjudged. And there'll be things in this podcast I'll think back on, a webinar I'll think back on, and I'll think, well, that present wasn't the most sensitive answer, or that wasn't the best answer. And I think it's through that constant self appraisal and that reflection that you become better at what you do. If you're a football player, you take 500 penalties if you're the penalty taker every day. In management, we're leading people talking to people, talking to clients, talking to customers every day. And it's about flexing that muscle to say, did I get the right tone? Did I use the right words? Was the sentiment, how was the sentiment felt by the person on the other side of the desk? And it's through that you constantly learn and develop. So I think that ability to be reflective about what you've done, but also to ask the people you're with, are you happy with what we've decided? How might you want to do things differently? Those for me are the really important things. So I don't start with middle management and say, what could you do better? I start with the culture that's created by the managers before in developing a supportive network, and a network where people know they'll make mistakes and people will reflect on those mistakes and continue to learn and develop. So it's the best sports teams, Matt. I know you're a keen cricketer, Matt, but the best sports teams and the best athletes are genuinely reflective after a game. They go to the dressing room and they'll say, I didn't play well. I did this, I did that. And they'll say it in front of the whole team. And it's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. And so being able to, as a team, sit down and say, didn't quite get that one right. And if people can see you do it, they'll know it's okay for them to do. And you do Absolutely. It because you want everybody to learn and grow. So it's all about having those that self-confidence and self-awareness to be able to do that.
Absolutely. And all that you've said there, Mark, chimes so well with what the hundreds of people that each year become chartered managers say to us about the process of becoming chartered. It gives them that rare opportunity to step back and reflect and then challenge themselves to become better. And we see through the surveys we do with chartered managers that the improvements in self-confidence and self-awareness are a direct result of that. So, yeah, fully believe in what you're saying about getting into that disciplined habit of taking the time to reflect regularly. And I think the sporting analogies are absolutely there to see, as you say.
And also, thinking about Matt, how have I helped somebody else to improve? I mean, I think one of the greatest kicks that you can get in life is helping other people. I think that altruism. I mean, Plato first said it, 2,000 years ago. That ability to draw pleasure and happiness through helping other people. And as managers, we get the chance to do that every day. We can help people who work with us. We can help customers. We can help clients. And if your mindset is, I'm here to help people, and that feeds, it's very selfish, really, because you're saying, that gives you a kick. And both Socrates and Plato in their writing said, look, you'll get happiness from winning an award or buying a new car, although they didn't have cars in ancient Greece, but getting a new house or whatever. But that's fleeting. The thing that gives you greatest happiness and pleasure is altruism, doing good things for people, because it feeds you for longer. And if you sit back and reflect and you think about, what was the last thing I did to help somebody, whether it's somebody crossed the road or somebody climbed a flight of stairs or whatever, that feeling stays with you for longer, and the positiveness of that feeling stays with you for longer. Again, can I remember when I bought my last car, and how did I feel when I did that? And so it's actually, in many ways, quite a selfish thing to want to spend time to support and help and coach and develop other people. And it does genuinely make you feel good, particularly when those people move on. And, I take huge pride now in seeing the people that I've worked with in the past, running big businesses. And, I just think how fantastic that they've developed to be able to.
Absolutely. Great stuff. Thank you, Mark. And we're going to take some questions from the audience in a moment or two. I can see there's a lot of chat from the audience. So thank you so much for what you've imparted thus far in the conversation. But if I may, I'm going to sneak in one or two other questions before we go to those questions from the audience. So I guess really on the sort of back of the last 2 years of leading organizations through the pandemic, I'm keen just to hear how your leadership style might have moderated through that time. What are the things that you've needed to draw on more, perhaps, through this period of time?
Well, I had discipline when I ran Waitrose that I had a list. You may think this is dreadful. I had the names of my senior managers on a piece of paper, And we would all be in the office on a Monday, so I'd see them then. But I would make a point of either talking to them on the telephone or seeing them in person every week. And that sounds really easy, doesn't it? I had 8 odd people who were my direct reports, and then probably another 5 or 6 who were in some way critical to things we were doing at the time. And on a Friday, there were always 2 or 3 that I hadn't called. And so making yourself talk to those people that you are in some way responsible for, I recognise at that stage wasn't something that you always did unless you gave yourself a bit of a prompt. So for me, what I've learned even more over the last 2 years, and not being physically with people in the office, is it's too easy to forget people. And just picking up the phone or doing a video call, just checking in and say, look, I've got nothing really to chat to you about from a business perspective. I just want to know how you are. That became even more important. And the more complex an organization that you run, the more important it becomes just to keep checking in with people. And I also found over the years that the most important thing is that human contact, that you just want to tell people that you're interested in them as people, that they matter. And again, through the pandemic, it arguably became more difficult not to see people, and so it became even more important to check in and just say, how are you? How are you? So I think that it heightened that awareness that I already had, that if you're not careful, you can go a long time between talking to people that should be important to you and should be important to the organization.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. So one final question for me in a moment, but if you're watching today live and you'd like to ask a question of Mark, then please do type your question into the chat and we'll get through as many as we possibly can before the end of today's broadcast. But last one from me for now, Mark. If you were thinking about the future, what would a fairer, better society look like to you, and how do you think we as managers and leaders can help to shape and deliver that?
Well, it goes back really to the work that we're doing with the 75th anniversary commission, and I hope that CMI managers who are listening to this will contribute to that debate. It's how do we make sure that we have equality and meritocracy across all groups, women, disabled, sexual orientation, age, social background. I mean, that ultimately has to be the goal, that what we have in the UK is a fair society that rewards performance, and that your race, background, colour, creed, whatever, does not affect those things. So the more we can work towards that, the better, both from a commercial point of view, a moral point of view, and a societal point of view. And I think we've got a way to go. So that for me would be the most important thing to draw out of the 75th, that we've got hard data, which shows us where we are, that points to where we could and should be, that gives practical advice to managers on how they might improve to create that fairer working society, but also perhaps points the government in the right direction at the same time.
Fabulous, thank you. Well, look, we're going to go to some questions from the audience, Mark. We've got a number coming in, so thank you to everybody that's already provided questions. The first one today comes from Jan, and Jan says that recruitment is really tough at the moment. I work for a great organisation with great employee engagement, benefits and flexibility, but we just can't compete with organisations who are doubling salaries to retain employees when they apply for new positions. How do you think we can stand out in the market when we can't compete financially?
Well, I think it's hard because, as I was saying at the start, one of the things that people expect is a fair rate of pay. And so if you're paying 20% or 50% below what people perceive the market to be, it will have an influence. Now, there are many people who do work in organisations in the not-for-profit sector, in the health sector, in other sectors, where they know that their pay is lower than they might earn elsewhere. And the motivation that those people have to go and work there is that they are doing something that has real meaning and purpose. and that gives them more pleasure than perhaps working outside and earning more. So there are people who do choose to work for organisations that they know have lower rates of pay because they get something else from it. So if you work for an organisation that's struggling to recruit, then you could think about promoting your purpose and the fact that people love being with you because you do something good or whatever. But I'm afraid in the main, people will gravitate to where they feel their pay is fair. And there are two factors at force in the UK at the moment that make things very difficult. One, about 1 million people have disappeared from the workforce. Some of those people have gone back to the EU and have not reappeared post-Brexit and post-COVID. And the other thing is that a lot of 50 plus people have decided that they want to reevaluate how they work and where they work, and they've disappeared from the workforce. So there is a labour squeeze at the moment, and as a consequence of that, you see pay go up. We also know that prices have gone up, inflation's gone up, driven mainly by energy prices, but there'll be a structural increase, I suspect, in pay of something like 5% to represent that movement in the market. And so those things, inflation, shortage of labour, and the fact that people are thinking more about purpose are going to make recruitment much harder. And you can pull that lever, as I said, about purpose, but ultimately I do think that employers will have to look at pay and will need to pay more if they're going to recruit the calibre of people they want and retain the people they've got.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So the next question comes from Patrick. Patrick says, Mark, I'm interested in any comments you might have on managing conflict in the workplace.
So I suppose I would look at this in two different ways. I think about conflict at the board, and I would think about conflict between a manager and an individual. And I would probably have different approaches for both. If I know when I'm chairing a board meeting, there are going to be differences of view and very strongly held differences of view, what I'll quite often do is ask an advocate of each point of view to represent those to the board so that they feel they have been fully heard. And I'll acknowledge that there are different views, and I'll acknowledge that there isn't a perfect answer to that question, and we're going to have to make a difficult decision and compromises. But I want both arguments to be heard in full. And then based on that, you work towards finding a resolution that the majority of a board will want to find. If you've got the kind of conflict that's one between an employee and a manager, or two employees, I think the only way you can ever resolve it is to sit down, listen to both sides, and to accept that somebody isn't happy. And if somebody isn't happy in their work or their job, then it's how do you help somebody move on? Do you move them to a different department? Do you recommend that they go and take a different job elsewhere? But sometimes you will find that there is a real conflict between two people, and it's not going to work out for them, and it's not going to work out for the business. So as soon as you've been through all the things of sitting down with both of them and understanding where their frustrations come from and thinking about how it might work, then I think there is something that's kinder of saying, we need to help you find something else because clearly this environment isn't going to work for you. And I think that's a positive thing. One of the things we do at WorkL is if you go and take our happy at work test, we'll tell you if you're not happy at work, and we'll say, look, you'd probably be happier in this job, or this company might be better for you. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, you should be quite selfish in thinking about, where do I get my enjoyment at work? I think your working life is important, and it's important that you enjoy it. So, if you don't feel you're in the right job within an organisation, or you don't feel you're in the right organisation, it's far better you do something about it and move on than you sit there and sweat on it. I was told that in a session by a professor called Rob Goffey at London Business School many years ago, that if you have a problem, there are two positive things you can do about it and one negative thing. The two positive are that you either tackle the problem head on, or you let the problem go. You just say, I'm not going to bother with it. I'm not going to let it trouble me. It's gone. The negative thing you do is you keep dwelling on it, that it remains a problem in your head for month after month after month, and it drags you down. So where you find those kind of conflicts, I think that you do either have to, lean into it and just say, what are we going to do? I can't put up with this anymore, or the organisation can't stand this rift anymore. Or you say, look, we need to let this go. There's a difference of opinion. We're never going to sort it. Shake hands and get on with it. So from my experience in training and development, that's how I would tend to look at those issues.
Fabulous, thank you. Next question is from Justine, and she says that she agrees with your point earlier that the relationship with your line manager is one of the most important things at work. In fact, I think you said it's the killer question really, in terms of whether somebody's going to be happy at work or not, how they rate their relationship with their line manager. If your relationship with your line manager isn't great, what practical steps can you take to improve it?
So it is the most important. It's almost perfectly correlated to your happiness at work, as I said earlier. So there are a number of things you can do. And it goes back to my last answer, really. The first is you can accept you will never get on with your line manager, that there isn't a meeting of minds, that your approach to work is completely different, and therefore you're going to move. I mean, that's a positive thing to do. The other positive thing you can do, and I have done this in the past, is I have persuaded myself that I just need to get on with this, manager that I've worked for. I persuaded myself that they are different to me, with different skills, different experience, and that we will therefore quite naturally have a different point of view. And I have sought to see the positive in what they do. And in a number of cases, that's worked really well. I've kind of built a different relationship. And it's allowed me to acknowledge when I talk to the person, look, you're the boss and you want to do it this way. I would probably have chosen a different route, but I'm 100% support, now committed to support the approach that you want to take. So there is something about positive thinking and how that can help you. I would say those are the two positive things to do, either accept that it's just not going to work with that individual and move, or to try to be very positive and optimistic and look for the best and accept there are differences. As I said in answer to the last question, the worst thing you can do is go in every day saying, God, I hate this manager, I hate this job, and just kind of keep going. It'll destroy you in the end.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We've got an interesting question from Abdul. And Abdul says that you mentioned earlier that communication is key to engaging employees. I've never managed to get the balance right between over communicating and not sharing enough. How have you managed to achieve that balance during your career?
You simply cannot over communicate. It is impossible. But the way you communicate needs to be changed. I remember a quote which goes something like, this sort of thing has to be said over and over again. People see the point but forget it. Newcomers arrive for whom the idea is new, but there must be endless repetition. But that repetition must be done in such a way as not to be irritatingly boring to those who've heard the same thing before. So the thing that you have to do, Abdul, is just keep telling yourself that you cannot over communicate. What you've got to think about is the mechanism you're communicating through and the message that you're giving. In most surveys, people say, oh, I haven't got enough information. The reality is the information is there. It's just that they've not chosen to go and see it or look at it. So you've just got to work harder to find ways of refreshing that. And I've seen it done in a myriad of different ways, from one-to-one meetings to team meetings to emails to QR codes to table talkers in the dining room to da-di-da-di-da. The job is never done. I mean, I often, when you get really, 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 really bored of saying something, people are probably just starting to hear it out in the organisation. And quite often, I think the fault is you move on to the next thing and people still haven't got the last thing. It just takes ages for things to really land, particularly if you're in a big complex organisation. And it's quite often, messages are very simplified. It's, here are 3 things, because for most people, they're hearing a message from their CEO, they're hearing a message from the department head, they're hearing a message from their regional manager, and you get this blurring of hundreds of messages and people going, well, which one should I listen to? So thinking about how you can knit those things together and make things clear, but repetition is the key, but not being irritatingly boring in the way that you go about it.
Excellent, thank you. Last question for today then, Mark, comes from Alfie. As a senior leader, how do you ensure all elements of EDI are given equal focus when some of the more high-profile areas, such as gender or race, are often at the forefront of an organization's thinking? It's a good question.
Well, it is, and the reality is that it goes back to the point that I was just making, that quite often in an organization you'll say our focus is on gender. And I think that's completely understandable. And I would be up for a program in a company that says, look, over the next 4 years, we want to see improvements in all of these areas, and we're going to focus on training or development in this space first, and then we do this space, and then we do this space. So I wouldn't necessarily be negative about an organization that says we're going to focus on this first and then we're going to come to this, this and this. I think that in an overall sense, though, just making managers aware of the points that we've made earlier, that there are a number of minorities. There are people from, socioeconomic backgrounds, which, will give them some sort of disadvantage, or gender or ethnicity or age. Or religion, and it's being aware of those. So the more conscious you are of those things, the more likely it is that you will treat people in a fair and equitable way, and look past those labels and tags at who's really performing, who's really delivering, what help and support can I give them to deliver even more. So I think there's a difference between how you might see something as an individual, and to be very aware of that, to how an organization might choose to go about, enacting different programs to get greater levels of equality through different groups.
Absolutely. Well, look, Mark, thank you very much for your time today. It's been great to talk with you. And for everybody that's been watching, I hope you've enjoyed the session, as I certainly have. If you're not yet a CMI member, then I'd encourage you to click on the link in the description below the video, where you can find out much more about us and indeed how to join us. But Mark, many thanks once again for joining us today and for all that you're doing for CMI.
It's my pleasure, Matt, and lovely to talk to you.